Dear Monsieur Heger, I have tried to forget you, for the remembrance of a person one will never see again exhausts the spirit too much. And when one has suffered that kind of anxiety for 1 or 2 years, one is ready to do anything to find peace once more.
Love triangles also played a part in Branwell's novel. Entitled "And the Weary Are at Rest," he reworked a childhood story about his soldier hero, the Earl of Northumberland. It was a romance, and now the hero lived out the author's dream of being united with his mistress. Charlotte knew that they couldn't expect their ailing father to support them forever. Advertisements for the Bronte sisters' school had failed to attract any pupils, and unless they could find a way to earn some money, they faced the dreadful prospect of becoming governesses again.
One day, I accidentally lighted on a notebook of verse in my sister Emily's handwriting. They were poems from her fantasy world of Gondor, and not at all like the poetry women generally write. They were terse and vigorous and had a wild, elevating music.
Cold in the earth, and the deep snow piled above thee, far, far removed, cold in the dreary grave. Have I forgot my only love, to love thee, severed at last by time's all-severing wave?
What are you doing?
Emily,
How dare you? That's my private writing case.
Emily's verses are wonderful.
Gondor belongs to me and Anne, not to you.
You should be published.
Shame on you.
Have you no spark of ambition?
The quarrel rumbled on for days, until Emily reluctantly agreed to publication, but only on condition that Charlotte and Anne published their poems as well, and that they all used pen names to hide their identities.
I think the world would take our poems more seriously if they thought we were men.
I'm so sorry to disturb you. I was looking for your father.
I'm sorry, Mr. Bell-Nichols. I haven't seen him for at least the last hour. Emily? No.
Well, if you'll excuse me.
I have it. I have it. My father's curate, Arthur Bell-Nichols, inadvertently played his part in our search for pen names. Mine was to be Currer Bell, Anne's was to be Acton Bell, and Emily's Ellis Bell.
What about Branwell?
I think you'll find Branwell has his own plans for publication. This will be our secret venture. I've chosen Aylott and Jones to publish our poems. Dear gentlemen, if you object to publishing the work at your own risk, would you undertake it on the author's account? We used a considerable sum from Aunt Branwell's legacy to pay for the initial costs of publication, but I hoped that in the end we would make some money by it.
Excluded by his sisters, Branwell turned to his long-suffering friend, John Brown.
This novel shall be the making of me, John. It tells of a beautiful, gentle woman bound in marriage to a brute. She's in despair until she meets Alexander Percy, the Earl of Northumberland. I'll read some to you. Maria Thurston had known enough of sorrow in her marriage, but God had intended her to both know and feel enough of love. Percy stands before her, A man capable of exciting every feeling that a woman can know.
I don't suppose it was Percy's got out to do with you, is he?
John.
My son, walk not thou in the way with them. My son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not. My son, walk not thou in the way with them.
Patrick now struggled to perform his parish duties and keep the roof over his children's heads.
My son, if sinners entice thee, consent thou not. My son, walk not thou in the way with them. Refrain thy foot from them.
He had no idea that his daughters had plans to make money through their writing, let alone that their first book had finally been published.
It's full of misprints. Look. They've put tumbling stars instead of trembling stars. It makes a nonsense of the whole poem.
We are published authors. At last. But if our book is going to sell, it must be noticed. I shall forward another £2 to Aylett and Jones so they can send review copies to all the best periodicals.
We can ill afford such a sum.
It's not an expenditure, it's an investment.
But Charlotte was wrong. The reviewers were more interested in the identity of the mysterious Bell brothers than in the work itself. Their book of poems sold 2 copies. Their brothers' dreams were fading fast.
Branwell had become hopeless, incapable of filling any respectable station in life. Even his plan to make money by a novel had come to nothing. But I began to wonder whether Emily and Anne and I should try our hands at a novel. After all, we had been writing stories since childhood.
Determined this time to write something that would sell, Charlotte abandoned the fantasy themes of childhood and made a first unsteady attempt to base a novel on real life.
My story is to be called The Professor. It is about a young man who goes to work as a teacher in Brussels. He labours throughout life, enjoys only a mixed and moderate cup of happiness.
It was written from a male point of view and was stilted and artificial. Her sisters, however, wrote from the heart.
My heroine is a plain parson's daughter called Agnes Grey. She is the youngest in the family and will surprise everyone by becoming a governess to try and save the family's fortunes. At last it was decreed that I should take charge of the young family of a certain Mrs. Bloomfield. Her husband had realized a very comfortable fortune, but could not be prevailed upon to give a greater salary than £25 to the instructress of his children.
You can't tell me what to do. You're just a governess. I hate you.
Anne's novel rang true because it was based on her own unhappy experiences.